murder of Munir Thalib. I hope that the short movie with the title His Story that we have watched can give us a nice introduction into this discussion. It is not easy to introduce a man like Munir in 30 minutes though. This panel discussions actually is a part of a series of events called Canberra Menolak Lupa. It is organized by PPIA or the Indonesian Student Association in cooperation with Indonesia Synergy. Canberra Menolak Lupa, a catchy tagline in Indonesian language, simply means Canberra refuse to forget. By the phrase Menolak Lupa or refuse to forget, we want to show that the Indonesian diaspora will never forget the gross violation of human rights happened in the past in whatsoever forms. As long as the justice is not done, the diaspora will remind and demand the government to solve and investigate the violations. One of such gross violations is surely the murder of our friends, Munir Thalib. Kami menolak lupa. We refuse to forget. We believe that to remember is moral obligation. Remembering is the path to an awareness of the depths of history that we have not yet settled with the victims of gross violation of human rights. We refuse to forget until justice crawls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Why Canberra? In our tagline, why Canberra Menolak Lupa? Canberra is the city in which the 10 years commemoration of Munir death is started. From Canberra, the Menolak Lupa movement, if I might call it, then spreads to other cities in Australia. Thus, similar events will also be held in several states, such as in New South Wales, with Sydney Menolak Lupa, in Victoria, with Melbourne Menolak Lupa, in Queensland, with Brisbane Menolak Lupa, and also in Indonesia, like in Jakarta. This series of events has also been reported in Indonesian mass media such as Kompas, Tempo, Metro TV, Detik, and also internationally, such as in the site of GIV, Global Indonesian Voices. In this occasion, I would like to share and tell you the series of events in commemorating the death of Munir. First, starting from 24th of August, PPIA organized literature competition for Indonesian native and second language speakers around the world, in which 30 poems were already submitted. They are written by people from various backgrounds, from elementary school student to the university lecturer. For your information, the winners of this competition will also be announced today in this venue, in this event. Second, on 25th of August, PPIA organized social media campaign through Twitter by using Twitter and tweeting to the official Twitter of the account of Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono and the President-elect Jokowi to solve the murder of Munir. The tweet says, Pak Joko Widodo, mohon tuntaskan ujian sejarah kita dari Pak Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono dengan menuntaskan kasus Munir. The committee also encouraged netizens or social media users to sign the petition in www.change.org/Munir. The campaign is also through Facebook, in which 10 years of Munir photo, you can see it near your seat, was created so that Facebook user can show solidarity by using that photo until 7th of September. Third, on 2nd September, which is today, the movie screening and the panel discussion is organized. Fourth, on 6th of September in the morning, an event called Walk for Justice will also be organized. It is 10 kilometers around Canberra, and the 10 kilometers symbolizing 10 years of Munir death. Fifth, the last one, on 13th of September in the afternoon, an event called Pray for Munir will also be held in Anuma Musalla. That's all the events which are called Canberra Menolak Lupa. To close this welcome speech, I would like to explain why Munir, why commemorating him. In terms of Munir and injustice, I would like to emphasize that PPIA, or the Indonesian Student Associations, that science for science sake is not enough. It is science for change that it is needed. Finally, on behalf of the committee, I would like all of you to join us in the remaining event, which is 6th of September, Walk of Justice. And if you don't sign the petition yet, please do sign the petitions in www.change.org/Munir. Thank you. For the next, we have poetry recitation. I would like to welcome a prominent Indonesian poet living in Canberra who just launched her magnum opus days ago at Baldasin Precinct Building, Zubaidah Juhad. She will be hosting all of us for about 20 minutes in reciting poems on Munir. Also, she will announce the winner of the literature competitions. For Zubaidah, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor for me to be in this room and being a part of the Cease Forgetting agenda. Munir, literature, cease forgetting. These are three important elements to recollect our memories about past crimes against humanity and its accountability. Literature, as part of language, is a blade to sharpen meanings and drive intentions. When politics lost its ethics, when power abuses are rampant, when violences are everywhere, and laws were powerless, literature will be one of means to bridge them, to tell the unread, to voice up the unheard, to smoothen sounds, and to ease the stagnant. It is a poem of Munir by Mustafa Bisri. Munir. Munir saja namamu, sederhana, namun mempunyai makna menyinari. Di masa kesederhanaan diabaikan, kau membuktikan kekuatannya yang elegan. Di masa para pengecut berlindung pada arogansi kekuasaan, kau tampil hampir sendirian melawan kezaliman. Bagaikan pahlawan dongeng yang menjelajah padang, mendaki gunung, menuruni jurang, melawan para penjahat yang sewenang-wenang. Dengan berani dan penuh kasih sayang, kau bela kaum yang lemah dan lemah. Di tengah-tengah kemewahan yang pongah, kesederhanaanmu pun menjadi mewah. Kemewahan yang dipamerkan, para pecundang pun menjadi menggelikan. Di tengah-tengah kekerdilan membungkus diri dan kekerasan dan rasa benci, kebesaranmu mengibarkan cinta kemanusiaan sejati. Di tengah-tengah kepengejutan yang kehilangan akal, keberanianmu pun menjadi anggun dan sakral. Tak ada yang dapat membendung dan menghentikanmu kecuali Yang Maha Kuasa, Tuhan dan sumber kekuatanmu. Bila iman adalah engkau, maka benarlah kata kiai, iman menjaga kemanusiaan dan nurani. Tapi mengapa kau dijemput terlalu pagi? Mungkinkah pohon yang kau rawat selama ini akan bersemi? Ramadan 1425. As part of the agenda, one of them is a writing competition on sastra menolak lupa. Let me know addressing the result and announcing the top winner. Just within a week, there were 30 contestants, Indonesians, and some are from other countries, and one of them is an 8-year-old children. Another thing that makes us happy, Gurindam become one of work contested in this event. This is incredible and touching. We are the 3 examiners, Yan Sinta Kurniasih, Amri Widodo, and me, Zubaidah Johar, deliver a high appreciation to all participants. Every word has its own strength and color suggesting the meaning of the getting popular of literature. In particular, those with the humanitarian messages. Given the contest takes only 3 ranking. Based on the criteria of the exam, which is the weight of message delivery, fame and smartness in choosing words, we will announce the 3 titles. In the first place is Munir and Dasawasa. In the second place is Gurindam 14. In the third place is Untukmu di Sana. The award will be handed by the committee chairman, Bung Sohib. All of our contribution will become one of the power to fight against crudity. We will dedicate this for justice, for Munir, Marsina, Wijitupur, Aceh, Papua, Trisakti, Semanggi, Talangsari, and those who struggle for peace. As a conclusion, I will read the poetry which get the first rank and one Gurindam with the second rank. Munir dalam Dasawasa oleh Suryani M. Menginjak dasawasa kau telah tinggal damai bersamanya, meninggalkan beributannya. Bagaimana bisa kau pergi dari kehidupan fana? Bagaimana cara Tuhan mengambilmu? Sakitkah? Mengapa pula tak kau beri tanda agar menjadi bukti sejarah bahwa Ratu Adil tak ada lagi di Nusantara? Janji penguasa, janji manis belaka, seperti penjajah agar laris dagangan. Alih-alih terkuak misteri perut nyawa, yang ada hanya drama di masa habis jabatannya. Di meja hijau si fakta terusir minggir, si pemegang palu membuat keputusan tak panjang pikir. Saksi-saksi dan terdakwa mangkir, tapi sahabat dan aktivis akan terus hadir. Dalam hati dan ingatan mereka jasamu terukir. Sekarang penguasa baru telah terpilih dalam pesta demokrasi 9 Juni. Penguasa terdahulu bilang, kisahmu menjadi taste of our history. Berharap penggantinya berseru, kasusmu takkan pernah berhenti sampai di sini. Gurindam 14 oleh Gayatri WN. Barang siapa bangga sebagai bangsa Indonesia, maka Pancasila akan membuatnya bahagia. Barang siapa menghayati Pancasila, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, pastilah dibela. Barang siapa menghidupi kebinekaan, sekali-kali tidak akan membenci perbedaan. Apabila kita semua tidak lupa Sumpah Pemuda, bercerai-berai berbahasa asing takkan kita tergoda. Apabila pemimpin tidak lupa pidato Trisakti, ia akan melayani negeri dan rakyat sepenuh bakti. Apabila pemimpin disiplin pun tidak korupsi, maka rakyatnya turut disiplin pun menjadi bersih. Apabila rakyat rajin bekerja dan pandai bersyukur, maka Indonesia akan sejahtera semakin makmur. Barang siapa mengakui sila pertama, tidaklah ia akan merusak agama. Barang siapa yang mengimani Tuhan Yang Maha Esa, tidak ia akan mencelakai makhluk tak berdosa. Apabila bangsa ini menjalin nilai-nilai keagamaan, maka keberagaman dijunjung sebagai keniscayaan. Apabila pemerintah menjunjung nilai-nilai ketuhanan, tidak akan pemerintah membiarkan terjadi perpecahan. Mereka yang meyakini dosa jika membunuh dan mencuri, tidak akan mereka menzalimi dan korupsi walau seujung jari. Jika pemimpin memberikan teladan, rakyat akan turut dengan sepadan. Jika orang tua mengajarkan kasih Tuhan sebagai panduan hidup, maka pewaris negeri akan menyalakan kembali cinta yang redup. Barang siapa mengakui sila kedua, kepada nurani ia akan setia sampai tua. Barang siapa hendak menjadi manusia sejati, kepada alam dan seisinya ia akan berbudi pekerti. Barang siapa berbudi pekerti kepada seluruh alam, tidaklah ia akan bersikap aniaya dan kejam. Apabila sila kedua dijunjung oleh pemerintah, hukuman harusnya ditegakkan kepada yang bersalah. Apabila pemimpin bersikap adil dan beradab, maka rakyat tidak akan berbuat jahat dan biadab. Jika semangat 45 kembali menyala di jiwa sebagai api suci, tidak terulang lagi 1965 dan semua luka yang dilambung pertiwi. Apabila pemimpin dan rakyat menjunjung kemanusiaan, niscaya bangsa ini akan diberkati dalam kemuliaan. Barang siapa mengakui sila ketiga, melihat Indonesia terpecah belah, ia tak akan tega. Mereka yang ingat semua pahlawan dan sejarah revolusi, tidak akan mereka bermusuhan dan menodai demokrasi. Barang siapa yang mengimani keesokan Tuhan, keesaan Tuhan, ia akan junjung persatuan dan menghindari berpecah belah. Mereka yang mencintai kedua orang tua pasti mencintai para leluhur walau sebelum bersuara. Mereka yang mencintai para leluhur dalam sanubari pasti menghargai pahlawan yang telah berjuang untuk pergi. Mereka yang menghargai jasa para pahlawan dengan putra dan putri Aceh sampai Papua pasti berkawan. Jika pemimpin dan rakyat bertekad teguh dalam persatuan, akan terwujud seluruh cita-cita dan harapan akan kemajuan. Barang siapa mengakui sila keempat, disadarinya gotong royong penting demi mengenal makrifat. Dalam gotong royong selalu ada musyawarah. Pemimpin dan rakyat tidak akan saling menumpahkan darah. Dalam musyawarah semua setia demi kepentingan bersama. Pemimpin dan rakyat pasti akan menjalani syariat yang utama. Barang siapa mengenal inti dari seluruh syariat, pemimpin dan rakyat tidak saling menzalimi sejak dari niat. Dalam gotong royong selalu sabar mencari mufakat. Pemimpin dan rakyat hidup sebagai keluarga menjalani tarekat. Barang siapa yang menghayati persaudaraan dalam tarekat, tanah air dan seluruh isinya akan senantiasa mendapat berkat. Barang siapa yang jauh dari inti syariat dan tarekat karena hedonisme, tak akan bermusyawarah dan bergotong royong demi individualisme. Barang siapa yang mengaku sila kelima, pastilah ia percaya pada karma. Pemimpin yang bersikap adil kepada rakyat, karena baiknya akan beroleh rahmat serta inayah. Rakyat yang saling menolong dan tiada saling menganiaya, karena baiknya akan beroleh bahagia sejahtera dari dunia. Barang siapa yang bersikap boros dan suka mencuri, karma buruknya akan menderita sakit tiada terpuji. Barang siapa yang malas dan selalu merugikan sesama, karma buruknya akan miskin dan berhutang seumur hidupnya. Barang siapa bangsa yang setia mengingat kesejahteraan sosial, negara dan tanah airnya tidak akan mendapat sial. Pemimpin dan rakyat yang bekerjasama mewujudkan keadilan, pada mereka Tuhan akan selalu menunjukkan jalan. Hendaklah bangsa berpegang teguh pada Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, supaya tidak Indonesia berakhir menjadi celaka. Mereka yang mengaku Bhinneka Tunggal Ika dengan benar, perbedaan mazhab dan golongan tidak membuatnya onar. Mereka yang mencintai Indonesia dengan segala ilmu, bahagia hidupnya dalam keberagaman tiada jemu. Anak bangsa yang menghargai jasa-jasa para pahlawannya akan setia menjaga kedaulatan bangsa dan kemerdekaan manusia. Pemerintah yang menjunjung kesetaraan dalam keberagaman, rakyatnya tidak akan merasa disisihkan hidupnya. Orang tua dan guru yang meneladankan kebinekaan, anak dan muridnya akan mewarisi kekayaan. Bangsa yang belajar dari masa lalunya untuk meniti masa depan akan selalu menemukan panduan dalam mewujudkan harapan. Hendaklah kita, terutama yang muda, mengingat Sumpah Pemuda, supaya badai dan ombak yang menerjang bangsa segera reda. Ibu dan bapak kita telah sama-sama berjuang demi negara. Mari kita harus mempertahankan memajukannya tanpa jeda. Hendaklah perempuan dan laki-laki menghayati kesetaraan, supaya kesejahteraan bumi pertiwi dalam pemeliharaan. Dari Aceh sampai Papua senantiasa bersatu padu, supaya manis hidup sebagai bangsa berlimpah madu. Berbahasa Indonesia dengan baik di kota maupun di desa, supaya kesatuan bangsa kita tetap jaya dan perkasa. Hendaklah pemerintah memberikan pendidikan sastra dalam sejarah budaya, supaya pewaris negeri mengenal akar bangsanya sehingga teguh berkarya. Mereka yang menggenggam Sumpah Pemuda, hidup damai berkerjasama walau berbeda-beda. Hendaklah para pemimpin mendatang mengingat. Hendaklah para pemimpin pendatang mengingat hati, agar mereka mengerti bagaimana harus berbakti. Pemimpin yang menggenggam Pancasila sebagai amanah tidak akan sekali-kali ia bersikap khianat. Pemimpin yang cerdik dalam siasat, arah pembangunan ekonominya tidak akan sesat. Pemimpin yang mengenal akar budaya dan jati diri bangsa tidak akan membiarkan keunikan dan warisan leluhurnya binasa. Penjajah asing datang dengan 1000 muka, supaya kita terpedaya dan tak lagi merdeka. Menetapkan menteri dan kebijakan hendaklah berpikir, disitulah banyak pemimpin yang tergelincir. Jika mengejar diri sendiri dan golongan sendiri untuk bahagia, maka keutuhan dan kedaulatan bangsa jadi taruhannya. Pemimpin dan rakyat yang menjunjung undang-undang dasar, arah dan tujuan hidup berbangsanya tidak akan tersasar. Hukum haruslah ditegakkan dengan adil dan setara. Dosa pejabat dan rakyat yang sama dipanggang dalam satu bara. Warga negara haruslah taat membayar pajak, supaya tanah air tetap nyaman untuk bekerja. Yang miskin dan terlantar berilah jaminan kesehatan dan pendidikan, supaya seluruh rakyat senantiasa riang dan tercerahkan. Hendaklah ingat mereka yang difabel dan di pedalaman, supaya kebaikan bumi pertiwi senantiasa dalam genggaman. Bangsa yang menjunjung kesetaraan laki-laki dan perempuan, kepadanya Tuhan menganugerahi perjamuan. Pemerintah dan pimpin tugasnya mengabdi, maka semakin tinggi dan berisi akan merunduk seperti padi. Pemerintah mendatang harus mengobati bekas-bekas luka yang dahulu, maka tidak akan ia mengulang sejarah yang penuh duka dan tak perlu. Thank you very much.
Finally, we move into our main agenda. I would like to welcome Professor Simon Rice to take the floor and host the discussion.
name's Simon Rice. I teach law at the ANU College of Law, and I'm very grateful and honoured to be invited by the Indonesian Students Association to introduce Usman Hamid and Marcus Winston to you in a few minutes. They'll speak for about 15 minutes each, and then we'll be able to take questions from you until about 6 o'clock. I begin by acknowledging the Indigenous owners of this land. The Indigenous owners here continue to be denied their rights, and they continue to fight for recognition. And I think it's apt to acknowledge that on an occasion where you have come here to acknowledge the efforts of a man who fought for democratic rights in Indonesia. I'm going to just reflect very briefly, because this is not my forum, before I introduce Usman and Marcus. 10 years ago, I just finished the fourth time that I taught human rights to Indonesians. Under the then Indonesian Australian Specialist Training Program, we ran human rights training for visiting Indonesians. Indonesians came and lived in Sydney for about 3 months, and we ran full-time human rights training courses. It was one of the highlights of my professional life to work so closely with such dedicated, enthusiastic, committed Indonesians who wanted to take back home with them an understanding of human rights law that they could take into their work. I was working with Indonesian government officials, officers of agencies, bureaucrats, judicial officers, local government officials, people who were in a position to go back to Indonesia and work locally to promote democracy in Indonesia. In that group of people, and it was 4 different occasions, 20 different groups of people over the years, there was never a member of the military. We used all joke and try and work out which one of the group that came down was the spy. We always felt we'd worked it out, but we were never quite sure. I continue to be in contact with those students. It's one of the wonderful things of working with Indonesians is how close and supportive relations with them are. And I continue to get text messages and tweets and Facebook posts and contacts from those students of mine, I suppose, who are in Aceh and Ambon, and Timor-Leste and Sulawesi, as well as in Jakarta. All of them continuing to do the work that they have committed their lives to do locally. It was only 2 months after they left here to go home to work as human rights advocates that news came through of Munir's death. At the time I was very conscious of how little known Munir was outside Indonesia and how hugely respected he was locally. And it's sad in a way that his recognition now comes internationally more from the fact that he died than from the work that he did in Indonesia. And yet I know, as you know, so many people continuing to do the work locally as he did, peacefully as he did, without violence as he did, insistently as he did in Indonesia. And I think it's important as we remember Munir and continue to campaign for justice around his death, to remember the work that he did and that people such as yourselves and your friends continue to do. He was a lawyer. I always like seeing lawyers who work hard, locally, modestly. It's not the reputation they have. But he was a legal aid lawyer who did one simple thing, persistently, that led to his death. He simply tried to hold the state accountable. He simply wanted to know that exercise of power was done responsibly and within an accountable framework. Not a big ask, but one that cost him his life. It may be a significant, perhaps the most significant recognition of the work he did were Indonesia to ratify the International Convention for the Prevention of Enforced Disappearances. Munir's was not an enforced disappearance. other campaigners in Laos and Thailand and in Indonesia have been disappeared by the state. But it's an international convention that comes very close to recognising the bravery of people such as Munir, and for Indonesia to ratify that convention would be a significant step towards recognising the legitimacy of human rights advocacy in controlling the power of the state. Indonesia might also, in recognition of the work that Munir did, repeal its laws that criminalise freedom of expression and continue to limit the kind of activity that Munir engaged in. In the meantime, however, you and the diaspora, as they were called, as Shoaib called you, continue to campaign for justice around Munir. And picking up a line from one of the poems we just heard, I think you continue to campaign to bring to fruition the tree that Munir nurtured to promote democracy and accountability in Indonesia. To speak to you with much more knowledge and insight than I have of that campaign and of Munir's work, it gives me pleasure to introduce both Usman Hamid and Marcus Mitzner, who are going to speak from here, and I'll take a seat. So I'll ask Usman to come and speak to you first. Do it from here, I'll sit down.
Good afternoon. I'm very grateful to be here. And thank you so much for PPIA, also Indonesian Synergy, for hosting 10 years of commemorations of the death of Munir. I actually have two options. One is to talk about the legal and political case of Munir. The other one is to touch base on the personal of Munir. I've spoken with my supervisor, Marcus Mitzner, and it seems that the personal one connect better to the literary that we've just enjoyed from the Bible. So let me begin by quoting what has been said by Munir. Islam is a religion of civilizations. Extremisms and intolerance destroy civilizations. This is in contrast with the functions of religion, which is to improve life. These quotes do not come from a renowned philosopher or religious figure or political scientist. It is from Munir, voicing his sense of inclusiveness and his experience, which show much extremisms, led him instead to inclusiveness and a love of life through the diversity of human faiths. This is one reason why we commemorate the death of Munir. First, in Munir, humanity is the foundations of religion. Munir, we knew, was not someone who helped others out of religiosity. He rarely uttered religiously related remarks. His apparent hiding of his religiosity may have been the result of his interaction with the weak and the oppressed. He once said to me, if anyone is murdered, or if a worker has an accident at the work or on the streets, anyone should help him without thinking whether his action is in line with the Quran or with the Bible. In his youth, one would not find such remarks. Munir's youth was marked with violence. From his own stories, he was frequently ready to hit or to throw someone with something, maybe in part given his small figure. As a human rights activist, he once received an award and was accused of being or abusing the cash prize of his organizations. Clippings of the media reports reached the markets and his neighborhood, and Munir was very angry. He said, if that happened a long time ago, I would have tossed the glass at the person. Munir said, but he confided, people can accuse me of anything, but not for being a thief. That saddened me the most. The young Munir's inclinations to anger affected everything from his relationship to religious issues. But later, he became more critical after he met a professor at Brawijaya University, where he studied in East Java. Young activists of Munir, as an activist of Indonesian Association of Students, HMI, took a closer look at his organization's statutes. He realized that Islam recognizes injustice and that there are those who are violated. Islam, Munir learned, was there for the violated, for the oppressed. As if in a miracle, Munir changed. He then became very spiritual in his religious practice, transcending formal lines of religion. He prioritized making the best of improving himself and the life of others. Not everyone has experienced extremisms, restlessness, or sensitivity like Munir. If everyone did, he might still be among us. Loving life can be born out of living religions, and also out of solidarity with others in need. Munir could sense the suffering of others. His efforts to improve man's dignity, woman's dignity, were by resisting to succumb the power, fear, and the oppression. What religion permits violence anyway? In this sense, Munir might have been in contrasting position with those whose understanding of Islam was limited to the text without the context of the teachings. But this precisely was the universal challenge of activists like Munir. In the book, Universal Human Rights in Theory and Practice, Jack Donnelly notes the contemporary development of Islamic thoughts by quoting Zakaria and Maudud. The essential argument of many writers is that contemporary doctrines of human rights repeat Islamic notions born 1,400 years ago. For instance, Maudud wrote that Islam has laid the basis of universal basic rights as a comprehensive unity, which should be noted and respected in all conditions. But Donnelly also notes the reaction of conservative figures such as Majid Kaduri, who is of the view that human rights is a privilege of Allah, for He is the main authority over such rights and freedoms. Therefore, the incoherency here is that human rights are God's rights, and that Islam concludes that human rights are not rights, but obligations, and that a person's entitlement to right is a consequence of his status or action, not a moral fact related to being human. If someone's right is only based on obligation and interdependence of one's duty to God and society, that is not human rights. Over and over, Munir would encounter people judging human rights as a Western product, because they said Islam does not recognize human rights. And over, he would explain that human rights was a result of the development of civilizations. Such rights were born out of the suffering of the victims all over the world. That of war victims, genocide, forced disappearances, as Professor Simon Rapp mentioned, and other forms of violence which continue to today. There is the issue of knowledge and how we understand God's teaching, more so because of our knowledge affects our actions. The sociologist Max Weber has reminded us of the importance of theology. He said it was important because there was no way to change social behavior without changing their ethical system. The ethic that has been mentioned by Zubaydah as well. Munir's spirit to maintain the torch of justice is in line with the general spirit of the Quran, to realize and to uphold justice, equality, and peace in society. Siding with victims, workers, and the poor was the core of practicing justice in Munir's political actions. Munir's spirit to maintain Munir's struggle was therefore universal. In South Africa, Munir was Mandela. In the United States, Munir was Martin Luther King. Such universality is remembered in the figure of all human rights defenders in the world. The principle of justice fought by these humanists is universal in nature and goes beyond justice, which is abstract and idealist. So this is similar of the goals of Islam, to become a universal religion and love to the world. upholding human values like justice should be in religious culture. Yes. The Quran's mission is to free humans from humans and inequality. Interpretations which differ from principles of justice should be refuted. The second lesson learned that I'd learned from Munir is that his humanity is his foundation for nationhood. Munir's friends knew him as both human rights activist and human rights thinker, and also one who thought deeply on nationhood. Munir said one day, to build a strong nation, to build a strong nation is that to build a nation that one could not rely on values which were against bonding the nation and which rejected principles of justice. This is why it was important to view the danger of militarism in Munir's view, in attempts to rebuild a nation with democracy as the bonding factor, as the foundations with which to build the nation's character. Robert Nozick, the rightist libertarian, but also an expert on the tradition of social contracts, writes in Anarchist State in Utopia that theories of justice should comprise theories of justice in even of takeover, justice and distribution, and redressing injustice. Edmund Kant notes the fact that it is easier to identify injustice compared to justice. He writes that justice is the active process of remedying, of preventing what erodes the sense of justice. In Munir, nationhood thus goes beyond narrow nationalisms, which prioritizes national identity. In his acceptance speech of the Right Livelihood Award, Munir expressed his cosmopolitan thoughts on the global citizens of an integrating world. In the future, Munir said, while following his footsteps of Willy Brandt, Munir said that we need to consider the possibilities of an integrating world on the basis of humanity, on solidarity. The evil conducted by the states in the name of progress and development can only be reduced if we can know ourselves as a part of another human's nature. Willy Brandt was the former chancellor of the West Germany, who tried to improve relations with then East Germany, Poland, and the Soviet Union. Munir taught everyone about fear. In Munir's thoughts, religions also place humanity at the core, like ideas and actions that he has been doing until the death came. Civilized nations, according to Munir, also prioritize humanity in social relationships. But Munir's critical thoughts on nationhood and religion led a backlash in the forms of attacks and allegations of being anti-Islam, communist, atheists, Jews, and anti-nationalists. Munir's life experience proved that it is no simple matter to revive humanism in nationhood and religious life amid our social and political reality. The attacks and accusations targeted at Munir were not merely verbal or black propaganda. There were also physical attacks to the office, to his house, to his family, and to himself, finally, a death. The attacks ranged from a general who wanted him dead, a package of high explosive in front of his mother's door, or an explosion at his home, or his wives and children, and attacks of our office involving hundreds of thugs, and at the end, the poisoning with arsenic. All these methods were brutal ways of cowards in panic. For the attacks were not targeted at Munir alone, but also universality of human rights. These methods of terror clearly spread fear, which grows on fertile grounds in repressive states. Fear silenced people, including many politicians and religious figures of the dark past of Indonesia, from intellectuals. As a human, Munir had fear, but his humanity and solidarity to others conquer his fear. What we fear is that fear itself, Munir would say. Here we recall the words of Franklin Delano Roosevelt when he was installed as a president of the United States in 1933, when he said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." These were not his original either. A French essayist, Michel de Montaigne, may have been responsible for making the press popular. "The thing I fear most is the fear itself. This is what always said by Munir. And Munir may have not intended to quote anyone. It was a statement he needed to keep up the struggle, to break through the tyranny of silence. He realized that anything in the way of activists such as bullets or tanks were not really major obstacles. The biggest constraint was in the mind, is fear. Fear, said Roosevelt, has no name. Fear, said Munir, reduces our sensibility and rationality to take action. It is no coincidence that such faith is shared by Christianity, that the root of sin is fear. It is neither a coincidence that such a faith in humanity and universal justice is the foundation for inclusive theologies. Theologies are also about action, upholding the right and fighting the wrongs, as is also recognized in Islam and all religion. One of Munir's fingers was almost severed when he was terrorized as he stood by the worker and as he stood by workers who had been dismissed. He would comfort those whose families members disappeared or were victims of forced disciplines. He even helped in the release of a member of special forces of the military who was taken hostage by the armed groups in Aceh. Munir was courageous. To become bold and conquer his fear, he fought it with love. As Eric Fromm said, a love with humility, courage, and discipline. A love found between parents and their child. Among fellow humans, a love to God, a universal of love. Munir's widow, Munir's wife, remember him as a man who loved life. He loved his family and looked after his fish. And his chicken? Sorry, what chicken? Yep. And would not shy from household chores. For Munir, love and solidarity were sensitivity to suffering of pain and injury from insults. Sensitivity would make it difficult for one to dismiss the other. To build solidarity, we need to go beyond our inner circle. I'm quoting here thinker Richard Rorty because of his similarities with Munir regarding solidarity. Munir was loved by all of us, the victims he stood for, because he went beyond words and ideas and was involved in meaningful actions of change. As Rorty wrote, it is not the belief in philosophy or religion, but sensitivity towards others that enable us to be in solidarity with human beings. Thank you so much.
Max, will you come and present?
In the middle of August 2004, I was invited to a farewell party for Munir that was held by his colleagues from the Pro Patria group. I don't think a lot of people knew actually that in his last 3 years Munir had transformed quite significantly from a human rights activist, which he always remained, but he was at the time of his death way more than just that. It was not only his courage, it was not only the bravery with which he stood up for the underprivileged. No, he was, at the time of his death, one of Indonesia's most brilliant minds. He had worked in the last 3 years before his death with this group, Pro Patria, to reform Indonesia's security system, to reform military and police legislation. He had learned quite significantly in the last 3 years to catch up with the vocabulary, with the terminology, with that knowledge that was necessary to allow him to engage in these kinds of discussions. And I was present in many of those debates he had with military officers, with police generals, and I realized how scared they were that Munir now was speaking their language. He suddenly was able to debate with them about affairs of national security, affairs of internal security in their own language, and that was something they had never imagined was possible. They knew Munir as the human rights activist who was using activist language, and therefore that allowed them to dismiss him as not being at the same level as them. But in the last few years before his death, he was able to lead discussions with them eye to eye, and that really significantly, in fact, terrorized the military and police officers that had to debate with him. The reformulation of the State Defense Bill of 2001, the reformulation of the police legislation, some of the legislation that was drafted up to the 2014 bill, all of that was the result of Munir's and his colleagues' work in the group of Pro Patria. Now, again, in middle of August, late August 2004, just shortly before his departure, there was a farewell that was held by this very group in the Santika Hotel in Jakarta. People who were present included Andi Wijayanto, Lisa Sukma, Cornelis Lay, Dani from LIPI, several others who were members of that group and who had learned from Munir how to combine the passion for human rights with knowledge about security affairs and use that effectively to change Indonesia's security infrastructure. And I think that is what made Munir so unique towards the end of his life. He was able to use his knowledge, his courage, his brilliant mind, not only to defend individual cases of human rights violations. No, he was much more interested at that time, 2002, 2003, 2004, to actually change the structural violence that was still occurring in Indonesia. He was interested not in cases. He was still, of course, listening to a lot of what was happening around Indonesia, but he had concluded by that time that in order to really change reality, you needed to change the structure, the institutions, the whole setup in which Indonesia's military, in which Indonesia's police function. So in that farewell, I was asked to give a little speech because I had become friends with Munir in those last years. I actually had tried before he left for the Netherlands to get him to the United States, because I was working in the American Embassy at the time for USA, and he wanted actually what he was most interested in around 2002, 2003, was going to the National Defense University there, and I nominated him for a scholarship there. Turned out the American Embassy blacklisted him for his criticism of the United States over the Iraq War, which led to a very angry exchange between me and the ambassador, which I eventually won after quite a long time. Munir was removed from the blacklist, but by the time when he was removed, he had already taken up the offer by the Netherlands to study there instead. So at that farewell, I was talking about two things, because Munir had told me there were two things he wanted to do when he was in Europe, besides, of course, doing his PhD. He wanted to go to many soccer matches across Europe. That was one of his passions. And he wanted to attend a lot of seminars. He wanted to travel around Europe. I, at the time, was still struggling to finish my PhD, and so I gave him the advice not to do what he intended to do, not to go to all of these soccer matches, not to go to all of these seminars, because if he didn't want to end up like me, again, me at the time in my 7th year of the PhD, he, as I advised him, should focus on his PhD. Unfortunately, as we know, he never was given the opportunity to do either of these things, doing the soccer stuff and certainly not focusing on his PhD. Now, as I said, in that farewell party, we had people like Andi Wijayanto, we had people like Rizal Sukmir, Cornelis Lay, Dani from LIPI, and you may recall that these are now the people who make up the inner core, the inner circle of Jokowi's political infrastructure. Andi Wijayanto the deputy of the transition office, Risa Sukma, the key foreign policy advisor, Dani advising Jokowi on social policy, and also very close to Megawati, Cornelis Lay, of course, the main liaison between Mega and Jokowi. So we have a lot of people in Jokowi's surrounding who were Munir's friends, and to some extent were his students as well. All of them are very much full of admiration for Munir, and I believe we should be able to see that in the upcoming administration. Now, before I go to some of the challenges that Jokowi will face to actually reopen this case and bring it to a conclusion, let us look for a while at why the case hasn't been resolved in the last 10 years. And the focus here obviously has to be on SPY. As we've seen in the film, and as I think most of us will remember, in that meeting with Suciwati, SPY said, this is a test case. I will basically evaluate the success of my administration at the ability of this administration to solve the Munir case. This is something we absolutely have to do. Now, Suciwati, of course, at the time believed in the seriousness of Yudhoyono's promise, but as she found out, a lot of other people did as well. You know, SPY has this tendency of making promises to a lot of people and never keeps any of them, and Suciwati found that that was exactly what happened to her. Of course, the case has not been resolved. The people in the background who were responsible for the murder have not been brought to justice, and certainly the SPY administration is responsible for that. But it is much more than just a personal failure of SPY that led to this failure. It is much more the general setup that SPY has made possible over the last 10 years that has created this failure. What do I mean by the general setup? I mean the kind of people he has put in place, the kind of institutions he has allowed to develop were simply not capable of leading a case like this to a conclusion. It's very clear that if you want a case like this to be resolved, you not only as president have to stand in the background and try to push that case to a resolution, you have to put the right people in place who actually can do that. In this case, it means a courageous, a reformist police chief, a very brave attorney general, and judges, chief justices who actually can reform the legal system. If you don't have these three leaders in place, then of course it will be difficult. And there's no indication that SPY ever in his 10 years attempted to put the right people into these positions, to put an Attorney General into that office that could clean up this highly corrupt institution. He had promised, as we know, one of his other promises that never was fulfilled, several times to make someone like Tuan Mulya Lubis Attorney General. That never happened because too many people would have advised SPY that that was not what he would have an interest in. Somebody like Tuan Mulya Lubis, of course, would create a lot of conflict with the entrenched structures within the office of the Attorney General, and the last thing SPY wanted was conflict. So you put people in who just toe the line, who are part of the entrenched elite, who are part of the apparatus that has been corrupt for many decades and continue to produce corrupt cadres. So again, the Attorney General's office, the way it has been run, the way it has been managed by SPY in the last 10 years, was simply not capable of bringing a case like this to a successful conclusion. And I would argue that was quite deliberate. If he had wanted to bring a case like this to trial and actually lead to solutions, then he would simply have appointed other people to do that for him. As we see in the film, it wasn't quite clear brought out, but one of the reasons why the case was never brought to a conclusion was in fact this very weak indictment. People who knew the case very well knew by the time the indictment was written that it would not lead to a verdict against Mufti. That was very clear. So it wasn't only the judges that released him, that acquitted Mufti, but in fact based on the way the evidence was written up in a very weak way by the Attorney General's office, didn't leave the judges much choice. The same applies to the police. We haven't had a single reformist police officer in the office of Chief of Police in UD almost 10 years. Now, admittedly, it's very difficult to find a reformist police officer among the entire elite because, this kind of system, this kind of apparatus produces corrupt officers, and by the time they come up to 2-star, 3-star, and eventually 4-star, if you need to appoint a chief of police from that pool, it becomes very difficult, but nevertheless, SPY didn't try very hard to find the most reformist out of this bunch of traditionalists available to him. He always appointed very safe choices, including the current police chief, who is arguably, in fact, the least reformist out of all of them he had in the past. And again, if you are hoping for police to actually solve a case like Munir's, bring all of the strings of evidence together, connect the dots, the phone calls that we've seen, again, it's mind-boggling that the police would not be able to build a case around that very overwhelming evidence. But again, if you don't appoint the right people to the job, then you get the outcome that you in fact expected from the very beginning. The third institution SPY has failed to reform is of course the justice sector. Once again, very, very conservative appointments. No one, not in the ministry, not in the key judicial institutions where he actually had an influence over, did he appoint people from about whom we could be confident that they have a reformist agenda. Again, every time it was consistent with this pattern of appointing conservative, status quo judges or other legal experts to very important posts in the judiciary and its associated apparatuses. Again, given that team SPY had put together, it was no surprise that we have seen this outcome. And again, everyone who knows SPY personally, who knows that he often makes very strong statements, very strong promises, but then doesn't follow up on them, would understand and appreciate how this case didn't come to a resolution. Now to Jokowi, what can we expect from there? And I'm sorry that probably I can't be overly optimistic when it comes to the prospects of reopening this case and bringing it to a resolution. As I mentioned, we do have in the inner circle quite a number of people who were personally friends with Munir, who have a great passion for him and what happened to him. But the overall political infrastructure is not positioned in a way that would make us terribly optimistic that we see a breakthrough in this particular case. And let me explain to you why. Again, if we go through the field, these three institutions that I mentioned that are key to the resolution of this conflict, Jokowi will face significant difficulties in actually putting reformers into these kinds of positions. Remember, for instance, that in order to get a chief of police through, once again, the pool is very limited. People who are already 2 or 3 stars are often status quo officers within the police, so it's very difficult to find someone to push through. And even if he did find somebody who would, for instance, promise to take up the Munir case again, this person would still have to be approved by Parliament. And it is something we, as political observers, expect to be very tough in the first few months, that conflict between Parliament and Jokowi as president. You know, he can't, that's the constitution, he can't appoint a police chief by himself. Whatever candidate he chooses needs to go through a process in the DPR, and as SPY found in late 2004 and early 2005, that's very difficult if you face a hostile DPR. We expect in the first few months at least of the Jokowi presidency a pretty tough ride for Jokowi in the DPR, as long as Golkar, for instance, is still under control of Abdul al-Bakri, as long as the Prabowo coalition still stands, as long as posts are being distributed in the DPR. I would expect that that coalition holds. Of course, as we move forward, it will disintegrate, but it will be very difficult for Jokowi to put into place a police chief at the beginning of his presidency that is actually in line with his political agenda. You know, SPY found that in 2004. When he came in, he had to leave the incumbents in place because he couldn't get through his own candidate. So that's number one. For the police, I'm very pessimistic that you actually could find somebody who can clean up the house and reopen this case and push it forward. How about the Attorney General's office? There, he actually has more room to maneuver because it's a cabinet appointment. It's only him who has the authority to appoint an Attorney General. But then again, there are certain realities within the Attorney General's office that probably he will be told a lot about by his advisors. He will be told, I'm sure, by some of these experts that putting a complete outsider into that post will be dangerous, because this infrastructure in the Attorney General's office has a tendency of simply shutting down if there are outsiders who challenge the way business is being done in that office. That's one of the reasons why SPY has always put people into that post who were actually acceptable to the majority of the bureaucrats working in the Attorney General's office. So whoever believes that he simply can appoint somebody who is a radical, who is a reformer, who comes in and completely breaks down all of these crusted structures within the Attorney General's office is probably a bit overly optimistic. I would assume that he will try to find a moderate who has an agenda for reform, but will try to implement that rather slowly. And I would also assume that probably the Munir case is not on the priority list, unfortunately. But then, of course, you have the judiciary. What can Jokowi do about the judiciary? The ways, the instruments through which a president in Indonesia these days can influence the judiciary are increasingly limited because the judiciary in the last few years has built itself a fortress that allows very little intrusion by external forces, and that includes the president as well. The president can, of course, appoint the minister for justice and human rights, and of course we hope that Jokowi will appoint a reformer to that post. But what the Supreme Court, for instance, has done over the last 10 years is separating itself out from the ministry. And a lot of the internal operations of the Supreme Court are now run autonomously through the Supreme Court itself. The Supreme Court is reproducing itself constantly internally without allowing reformist influence from outside. So having said all of that, I think we should lower our expectations. We all, of course, want to see the Munir case resolved. However, there will be disappointments, there will be compromises Jokowi will have to make. There will be a lot of resistance from these various institutions, from the police, the Attorney General's office, the judiciary towards radical reform. But as I said, it's not enough for a president to push these cases. You need to have these three institutions actually buying into the process and pushing it forward. Then, of course, we have the problem that all of you are aware of, that in Jokowi's surrounding and Megawati's surrounding, there are people who have very direct links to this case and who will certainly try to use their influence to prevent a reopening of this case. And I applaud everyone in this room and outside who have made their views known about what Jokowi needs to do with these people. Of course, Hendro Priyono being the most prominent among them, and that he should not appoint Hendro Priyono to any position of political influence. That's central, of course, to his reformist agenda. But again, I want to warn here, it's not only about Hendro Priyono. Don't believe that if Hendro is taken care of, this case can be reopened. The police, the Attorney General, and the judiciary will prove formidable opponents towards any kind of push towards reform. Thank you very much.
We have 15 minutes for questions, which Director Munir and Marcus. Just put your hands up and I'll call on you. We don't have a microphone, so you just have to speak up. Yes, sir.
One of the reasons why I think this case is so important is not just to achieve justice for Munir's widow and his supporters, but because of the message it sends today that you can get away with it, that those that try to silence dissenters or human rights campaigners can get away with it. And so achieving justice for the crime of 2004 can have an effect on contemporary Indonesia. I wonder to what extent the lack of justice for the case of Munir, but also the cases of the violence of the 1960s and the anti-communist pogrom that occurred, and the violence of 1998, the fact that few or in some cases no one has been held to account for those, to what extent it affects the way that Indonesia operates today.
I should have asked one. So do you mind just introducing yourself?
My name's Ari. I lived in Indonesia for a couple of years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Since the very beginning, we believe that the death of Munir is a symbol of a structural human rights violations in Indonesia. Even days before he was murdered, Munir was involved in a series of demonstrations criticizing the government and the judiciary for releasing all perpetrators of crimes against humanity in East Timor, and also in a mass killing in 1984 in Tanjung Priok, where most of Muslims were being murdered. So, I think, borrowing the statement from Yudhoyono, the reopening of the case of Munir will be the key whether Jokowi will move further prosecuting past human rights abuses starting from the 60s. I believe that people around Jokowi have commitment for achieving justice for past human rights abuses, as we can see from the official document of Jokowi and Yusuf Kala, Vision and Mission, which is clearly mentioned that most of the past human rights abuses started from the 65 to 1990s have been mentioned, and Jokowi will address such matter in his administration. However, Dr. Marcus has already mentioned some challenges, which I think there is only one single major case which might be possible for Jokowi to deliver, which is the the enforced disappearance of pro-democracy activists in 1998. Why? Because one, there has been an official recommendation made by the parliament back in 2009 to Indonesian president to set up an ad hoc human rights court. Second is to set up a commissions of fact-finding to find the fate and the whereabouts of the missing activists. Third is to provide rehabilitation and compensation. Fourth is to ratify the Convention on the protections of all persons from enforced disappearance. The fourth recommendation has already been in progress, where Minister of Foreign Affairs has signed the convention and waiting for further process from the Parliament to ratify this convention. And the rest three recommendations, I believe that it would be fully in the hands of Jokowi. It wouldn't be depend on political approval of the Parliament, just like for other major cases. So I think this is the only one possible case that would be delivered by Jokowi. But however, again, the challenge is not only the presidency of Jokowi, but also the judiciary. Marcus has mentioned that judiciary is very weak, police. So, yeah, I think that's the only hope, the window of opportunity for the future of human rights for passive users.
Yes, sir. My name is Andreas Arsono. I'm working for Human Rights Watch. I have a question.
Andreas is the one who brings these posters from Jakarta to Canberra, so thank you for him.
One said it is cheaper to print in Jakarta.
PPIA, sorry.
I would like to know the pool of potential chiefs, the pool for the potential Supreme Court Chief Justice, and also potential Attorney Generals for Jokowi. I know that Tijo Alcosta is among the Supreme Court Justices. I think he's a good guy. I would like to know of all these existing pool among 3-star general or senior public prosecutors in Jakarta, who are the most possible reformers? And I know that both of you understand quite a lot among all these potential officials in those three institutions.
Well, I mean, that's a problem. I think the term reformist in these kinds of ranks is really relative. Right? I mean, you would have to look at the track record, you would have to look at their wealth. You know, the police commission has, I think, done quite a bit of work on that, laudably. You know, look at how much money do police officers have in their accounts and where it's coming from. But in terms of a really clean track record, reformist record, you know, it is very difficult to find anyone. I think to find the least conservative one is probably the bigger challenge, or the more realistic challenge for Jokowi, and that applies to all of the three institutions. But again, for the Chief Justice, for instance, it's not only the President who appoints that justice. There's a long process involved in that. The DPR has a say in it, and so on. So it becomes a process of political compromising. Then it's about, you know, who does the President want, who does the DPR want, who does the majority of the political parties want, who does Megawati want, you know. And so I would not be able to come up at this point with a list of police officers at that rank, 2 or 3-star, who would be real reformers. And quite frankly, if I had one, I wouldn't mention him, because that would be a death sentence for that person. Once that's out, you know, oh, this guy's a reformer, that does the trick for a lot of the conservative forces around Jokowi, in the DPR, in the government, to actually prevent that person from getting up. So we will just have to see how this whole game plays out. I mean, SPY, for instance, I remember very clearly the last 2 occasions when he chose a police officer. he was actually so annoyed by a lot of the NGOs who told him, you have to appoint this one, that he made a case out of not appointing this person. And in both the last two cases, he appointed the only person who was actually not in the race in the newspapers, because he felt he needed to state his presidential authority by appointing somebody who was not pushed by the media, or pushed by political parties, or pushed by the lobbyists around him. So again, mentioning names now may actually become a weapon.
We have time for a couple more questions. Anybody would like? Yes.
I guess since we're sitting here in Australia, I'm Elaine Pearson, also from Human Rights Watch. What role do you see foreign governments like Australia or the US in pushing for accountability? And I guess how can they do that effectively, or is there a concern that that could hinder these efforts?
That's a very important question. So I think the murder of Munir is an internationally known case of murder of human rights defender. So from a couple of years, I've been doing the advocacy since the beginning. It was also helped by the support of the international community. It has been an attention of UN reporter Philip Salson of extrajudicial killing and executions, also special reporter on human rights defender Hina Jilani, and special reporter on independent judiciary Leandro Despoy. They wrote a letter to the president. US Congress from Republican Democrat also wrote letter to Yudhoyono. The Netherlands Parliament from both from diverse of political party, from Christian Democrat, PPIA, etc., have also addressed the matter to Indonesian authority. Even more than 400 member parliaments in the European Union have signed an official declaration addressing the questions of Munir on behalf of the European Parliament, and that was very well appreciated by the chief of the criminal investigation department at the time, I remember, from the police. He was like, really wants that support from international community so that he can push for more action toward his subordinates to take more investigative process in the case of Munir. And if we look into the time frame of the progress, for example, I think the most important moment was in 2008, where former commander of special forces, where former deputy chief of intelligence agency was finally detained by the police. It was just less than a year after all the letters sent by the UN reporters, Congress, Netherlands Parliament, even I think Australian Parliament. I remember I accompanied Suciwati 2 times to meet with the Senate and also the member Parliament in Australia. So it is important to resend the message to the world that there is an unfinished agenda for Indonesia and also for international community, which is the unresolved murder of Indonesian human rights defender Munir Saidal.
Final question. Your final opportunity. Very well. Oh, well.
Yeah. You said in your speech that how he changed the way he approached human rights, taking on more than just individual cases, but taking on the structures and the institutions. Would you say that there's been a lasting impact in terms of how human rights activists now in Indonesia are dealing in their advocacy, and are they now taking on the institutional structures in a bigger way as a result?
No, but he was an example, right? I mean, this is exactly what Munir wanted to do, and he told me over the last 2 years before he left, I know that if I really want to change Indonesia, I need to understand the structure. I need to be able to speak the language of the people I need to negotiate with, and that's the military and the police and the legal sector. I need to be able to broaden my horizon, to understand how things are done across the world, and when I come back, then I can apply my knowledge even more effectively than I have in the past. And this is what this gentleman is doing right now. And of course, there's no one who has followed Munir better in his example than Usman has, and he's again following once more in his footsteps, trying to channel that activism in a structural way that actually can penetrate discussions of institutional change in Indonesia, and not only, again, the handling of cases is very, very important, but the structural reform of the system that actually prevents the repetition of these cases is arguably even more important. And we see more and more people going down that path that Munir went, or tried to go, as he left for the Netherlands, and that is really transforming and translating that activism into powerful intellectual messages that then can change the foundations of the system.
Another question? I was just stretching.
Thank you.
Would you join me in thanking Usman? That concludes the evening. Thank you very much.
Before leaving the room, we would like to invite you to join us in the photo session, one man, one poster.
Where? Here. Okay.
Let's gather in the middle. Photographer, please direct us. Okay.
I thought you wanted to say
Please stay on the range of the photo. We need to get closer, ladies and gentlemen.